Welcome back to my channel. I am Nikki the Great, coming at you again with another message. And in this one, we are going to talk about the product of a vow. The product of a vow. If you have not already, please subscribe and hit that little notification bell so you can be made aware of any new videos that I post. We're going to begin with the prophet Samuel. Okay, Samuel was a prophet. Before we can talk about Samuel the prophet, we have to talk about Samuel's mother, Hannah. Okay, and we're going to take home three things from Samuel's mother, Hannah, before we get into the meat and potatoes of the product of a vow. Number one, Hannah was barren. Hannah was barren, and her husband loved her very, very much. But because she was barren, he married another woman, Peninnah, who was her sister wife, for the purpose of producing children for him. Now, even though Peninnah bore many children to her husband, he still treated Hannah as if she already had children for him. Peninnah was very jealous of Hannah. She was probably jealous of Hannah because Peninnah already knew that the reason why her husband married her was for the sole purpose of producing offspring for him. So she would constantly rub that in Hannah's face that she is barren and her womb has been multiplied, and Hannah was barren. And in her anguish and in her sorrow, Hannah took it to God in prayer, and she prayed to God and begged to him to open up her womb so she could produce children for her husband. And in this begging of God that she had done, she found herself in the temple. And in the temple, I like to envision the story as her in the temple by herself, in between services, agonizing and crying out to God and begging him repeatedly, Lord, be with me. I'm going to go ahead and take you to 1 Samuel. We're going to go chapter 1, verses 11. Listen to this, okay? And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thine handmaid and remember me, and not forget thine handmaid, but will give unto thy handmaid a man-child. Now listen at this. Hannah was specific on what she wanted. Some of us need to be more specific on what we are asking God for. Hannah was specific. She asked God for a son. Then I will give him unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head. So not only was Hannah in need of something great, she went to God because she knew that he could give it to her. And when she went to God because she knew that he could give it to her, she was specific on what she wanted. And with the specification on what she wanted, in return, she made a vow to God. We're talking about the product of a vow. She in turn told God, if you would give me a man-child, I will give him back to you. Oh, Lord, thank you, Jesus. Let me tell you what happens then. God granted her petition. God granted her petition. What we don't realize is that God is in the business of making miracles happen. God sits high and he looks low, and he wants to bless us. He wants to grant us the things that we so longly desire, the things that are upon our hearts, but he wants something in return. He wants us to give back to him the same things that he has given to us. Now let's take a look at what happened when God granted her prayer with the vow. Wherefore it came to pass, we're in verse 20. Wherefore it came to pass when the time was come about after Hannah had conceived that she bare a son. God kept his promise and called his name Samuel, saying, because I have asked him of the Lord. Because I had asked him of the Lord. So what do you think Hannah did after she had Samuel? Do you think she kept up her end of the deal? Do you think she kept up her vow? Let's continue reading at verse 25. And she went back to the temple with Samuel. So she did end up keeping her vow that she had made to God. So when Samuel was weaned, I think he was roughly about 3 years old. She gathered, a bullock and brought the child with an offering to the priest, okay? And she said, O my Lord, as thy soul liveth, my Lord, I am the woman that stood by ye there praying unto the Lord. Now what slipped my mind was that in the beginning, when she was begging God for a son in the temple by herself, it was perceived that the priest Eli looked upon her and assumed she was drunk. He assumed she was drunk, and he went to her. He said, "Woman, put away." It's earlier in the chapter. He said, "Woman, put away your wine." And she said, "I am not." She said, "I am not drunken, priest. I am in bitter soul. My spirit is down." And he said to her, whatever you are praying for, so let it be done for you." And she left, and that's when the story began to start, okay? So she did return Samuel back to God and placed him in the care of Eli, the priest, that initially thought that she was drunk when she first got to the temple. Okay, here we go. "For this child I prayed, and the Lord hath given me my petition, which I asked of him. Therefore also have I lent him to the Lord. As long as he liveth, he shall be lent to the Lord, and he worshiped the Lord there." Samuel is given to the priest Eli, okay? Samuel is given to the priest Eli at about the age of 3. So a few years go by, and he's still living in the temple, growing up in the temple, learning the things of the priest, learning the ins and outs of the temple. And his mother just didn't leave him there and never return. Every year for the celebrations and the feast, she would come and she would visit Samuel. She would bring him things like clothes. So she still would come and visit him and see him every year. So when Samuel was about, scholars say that he was in between the ages of 8 and 12 when God called him. Okay, God called young Samuel. Let's go ahead and jump to 1 Samuel chapter 3, and I am going to read the entire passage, okay? And if you would like to, you can go ahead and read along. Here we go. We're going to start with verse 2. "And it came to pass at that time when Eli was laid down in his place, and his eyes began to wax dim, that he could not see." This is the priest Eli we're talking about. "And ere the lamp of God went out in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was, and Samuel was laid down to sleep, that the Lord called Samuel, and he answered, Here am I. And he ran to Eli and said, Here am I, for thou callest me. And he said, I called not, lie down again. And he went and lied down." Okay, so this young boy between the ages of 8 and 12 is in his bedchamber sleeping, and he's hearing someone call him, and he assumes it's Eli the priest who is raising him. "And the Lord called yet again, Samuel. And Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, Here am I, for thou did call me. And he answered, I called you not, my son. Go lay down again." So mind you, Samuel's a little boy. He knows what he hears. He's not having delusions or hallucinations. He's audibly hearing somebody call his voice. Here we go. "Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord." Samuel did not yet know the Lord. When the Bible says did not yet know the Lord, that means know him for himself. Now, Samuel has clearly spent over probably 5 years growing up in the temple, hearing about the Lord, practicing rituals about God, and going through the things that they did at the temple as the priests and I guess as the Bible or altar boys. But he didn't know God for himself, so he wasn't familiar with his voice. Let's keep going. Now Samuel did not know yet the Lord, and neither was the word of the Lord yet revealed unto him. And the Lord called Samuel again the 3rd time. And he arose and went to Eli and said, Here am I, for thou did call me. Now I bet you by that 3rd time, little Samuel went to Eli, he probably had an attitude, look, I know you called me. And he went to him the 3rd time. And Eli, mind you, at the beginning of this chapter, Eli's vision, he was getting older. He was an old man. Eli's vision was failing. And so then Eli probably put 2 and 2 together and figured out what was going on. And Eli perceived that the Lord had called the child. Eli had perceived that the Lord had called the child. Therefore, Eli said to Samuel, Go, lie down, and it shall be, if he call thee, thou shalt say, Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Whew. That just touched me to my heart. I'm going to tell you why. When I had read this story a few days ago, the Spirit told me when I was reading this particular verse, I didn't want to scare him because he didn't know me. I didn't want to scare him because he didn't know me. This young little boy, this young little boy, God was calling him. But you see, God wanted an introduction, so he didn't scare little Samuel. But see, what we're not saying is that God had a position that was empty. Okay, God had a position that was empty, and he was looking for someone to fill the position, and he knew exactly who was going to fill the position way many years before Hannah even thought of the fact that she was barren. God knew he was going to use her. God knew she was going to come to him in distress, and he was going to use her womb, and he was going to produce a vow within her. A promise was fixing to come from Hannah. You see, God wanted an introduction to young Samuel because he didn't want to scare him, because he knew that this was going to be the beginning of a relationship that was going to go on for decades. And he knew that this relationship that he was going to have with Samuel was going to be something so amazing and dynamite and mind-blowing that he needed an introduction. Listen, God is calling us by our names. God is calling us by our names. And we are assuming that that voice belongs to somebody else, when in all actuality, the voice belongs to God. Allow this message to be the introduction. That is God that is calling you. That is God that is calling you. All right, let's go ahead and move on, okay? And the Lord came and stood and called as at other times, Samuel, Samuel. Then Samuel answered, Speak, for thy servant heareth. See what Samuel did, young Samuel, a little boy. One thing about it is there's no age limit on vows. There's no age limit on covenants. There's no age limit on how on how old you have to be or how young you have to be to have a relationship with God, okay? But when Samuel said, Speak, Lord, for thy soul, for thy servant heareth you, what Samuel was doing was that he was acknowledging who God was. Even though he didn't really understand who he was, he accepted him and gave him permission to speak to him. The Lord said unto Samuel, Behold, I will do a thing in Israel at which both the ears of every one that heareth it shall tingle. The power of this prophet came from the product of a vow. The product of a vow. You see, Eli had not been doing what he was supposed to be doing in his own household with his own sons. And he would turn his eye to the misbehavior and misconduct of his sons. And he wouldn't do anything about it. And God used young Samuel to basically tell Eli the priest what his sons were doing and how his house was not in order. Let's go ahead and ask ourselves some questions. Let's ask ourselves some questions. Are you willing to beg God the way that Hannah did? Let's talk about ourselves. Let's talk about questions. These are rhetorical questions, okay? What is your heart's most deepest desire? What is the yearning? What is that thing that all of us have something within us that we just really want? Tap into that. Figure out what that is. Some of you might even be in denial about what you really want. Your heart's desire. You probably think that there's no way that this could ever happen for me, so let me go ahead and just bury it. Well, I'm telling you right now, go ahead and unbury it and think about the thing that's deep within you that you want God to bless you with. Something that just hit my spirit just now is that the manifestation of your deepest heart's desire is on the other side of your praise. Are you willing to beg God the way that Hannah did? Are you willing to beg God the way that Hannah did? Are you willing to pour your all and everything into what you want the way that Hannah did? Are you going to make a vow to God? What are you going to give him in return? This is a wholehearted thing. This is not some form of manipulation, okay? The next one, what would you do if God granted you that petition? If God blessed your heart's deepest desire, what would you do? Would you keep your vow the way that Hannah did? Now, mind you, Samuel was Hannah's first and only child. He was her only child. And she winged him for 3 years. For 3 years, she provided intimate care for this boy, only for her to take that 3 years of her effort and time and energy of pouring and nurturing to give it to the temple, to lend him to God. In case you're wondering, Hannah did go on to have many more children. But are you willing to give God your only? Are you willing to give God all of your energy, all of your effort? Are you willing to do that? Are you willing to make the ultimate sacrifice? That's what God wants. He wants us to give him our everything so that he can be our everything. Think about giving God your most precious asset the way that Hannah did. What does that look like to you? What does that look like to you? I have to believe that Hannah had an unconditional, undying love, affection, respect. She had a real intense relationship with God. It doesn't say this in Holy Scriptures, but for her to make that huge sacrifice, I believe she loved God with all her heart. That's why she went to him seeking her petition unto him, because she knew that he was going to grant her the thing that she wanted the very most. And she vowed, the thing that you're giving me, the thing that I wanted the most, I'm giving back to you. Hannah kept her vow that she had made with God. In return, God continued to bless her womb, so she had many more children. You see, if we fail at keeping our end of the vow up, if Hannah had not given Samuel to the priest, back to God, like she promised, she probably wouldn't have had any more children. And in this, she was able, at a distance, to watch her son, Samuel the prophet, grow up into a mighty man, a powerful man that had visions. And he was the one that went to Jesse's house about King David. Samuel was a bad brother. Samuel was one bad dude. Now I want you to take home 3 things from this story, okay? I want you to take home 3 things from the story. God is calling you, but the transmission is foggy due to our lifestyle and decision-making processes. Okay? Distractions serve as our biggest enemy, all right? God is calling you. I don't know exactly who I'm talking to right now, but God is calling you. And because the transmission is foggy on our end, we assume that the voice belongs to somebody else. That's the voice of God that is calling you, and you need to go in and answer him, all right? Number 2, consider this message as your introduce me. Just like God wanted Eli to introduce Samuel to him, allow this message, these words, to introduce God to you, okay? Number 3, I want you to answer, accept, and give God permission in your life. I am Nikki the Great, and together we are growing, sharing, and thriving.